Currency liquidity in Nigeria began to assume larger-than-life dimensions in the few weeks that heralded the general election of last year. Now, those in charge of monetary and fiscal policies of government at the time birthed the idea of redesigning the naira, Nigeria's national currency, but began to disagree when the policy went off the rails and provoked intense public pushback. In the close to 2 years since then, the story hasn't changed much, with the currency squeeze biting harder and banks mostly preferring to do business with point-of-sales operators rather than their own customers. We're now being joined by Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, Dr. Muda Yusuf, for a quick discussion around the effects of this development on the economy with a view to proffering solutions to the problem. I'd like to say good afternoon to you, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Awa and Shaitan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for being here. Well, we know it's the Christmas period. Cash is hard to come by. But the Vice President, Kashim Shettima, called out POS operators and ordered that there's a connection between the banks and the many POS vendors who are selling cash. Could you explain a little bit more to us? Why is that? And should they just be banned altogether?
No, not at all. The POS operators are providing very valuable service to the citizens of this country. They have facilitated financial inclusion. They have made it easier for people to access cash generally in the economy. I think what we need to do is to look at the fundamental issues around the cash scarcity. And let me also say up front that we cannot compare the current level of crisis we have with what we had in January, February, March of last year, when we had this Naira redesign issue. Because if we look at the data, at that time, the currency in circulation fell to below 1 trillion naira. It was slightly over 900 billion. And as we speak today, currency in circulation is 4.5 trillion naira. So we have significantly more currency in the system than what we had when we had the Naira redesign issue. The Naira redesign was a deliberate policy of government. What we are having now is not a deliberate policy of government. I think it's a function of the dynamics in the economy, and it's a function of the increasing demand for cash, which is not matched by the supply side for cash. Basically, that is what it has been. Cash is a payment instrument. And if you look at all the entire spectrum of payment instruments, the value of transactions on those platforms have increased by, in some cases, by more than 100% in a year, within the last 1 year. The same thing is happening with cash. But what the challenge with cash is that as the demand for cash has been increasing, especially because of the inflationary situation, the supply of cash has not been increasing. Because over the last 1 year, the amount of cash just grew by, about 50% or 40% or even less. Whereas prices have doubled. In some cases, prices have gone up by over 200%. So for the segments of the society that uses cash, the amount of cash that they need has increased. It has doubled. Sometimes it has tripled. Especially in the informal economy, in the rural areas, and so on and so forth. So for me, these are some of the fundamental issues. Secondly, the use of online payments or electronic payments is a function of confidence. The experience that people had in the last month or two about the collapse of online payments and all these things affect confidence. And this has driven some people either to the fintech platform or driven them completely out of the cashless environment, and they decided to now begin to use cash. So there are quite a number of factors that we need to look at. It's not just about, telling the banks to ensure that they they make cash available at the ATM. They can only make available what they have.
Okay,
About
Dr. Yusuf.
95% of cash is outside the banking system.
Okay, so let's come in here, and I like that you've touched
Yes,
on
I'm
two
with
things,
you.
and I would like us to really go into these factors that is causing these problems. So first off, while these POS agents are providing critical services, many operate with a regulatory oversight or even customer identity checks, which in itself raises concerns about security and fairness. So do you think that there has to be a balance struck between stricter regulation of agents and maintaining their accessibility to some of these underserved populations who can't get this cash? Then when we talk about the policies that have put in place, because you've also shone a light on that as well, the redesign of the Naira was intended to address issues such as excess cash in circulation as well as financial irregularities. Yet it seems to have created new challenges for the average Nigerian. So do you think that this policy was implemented with adequate foresight? And what might have been done differently, or what can even be done now to avoid this current situation going along even further?
Well, let me say that to the best of my knowledge, there is no policy now, currently, that is targeting specifically to reduce the amount of cash in the economy, unlike what we had during the former dispensation in the Central Bank of Nigeria. What we had at that time, I think, was there were other motives. They were not specifically monetary policy objectives. Because when we are talking about money supply is not just about cash. You have seen all the policies of government around liquidity management, which is announced each time we have these monetary policy committee meetings. You have seen how the cash reserves CRR has been moved up to 50%. You have seen some issues around the MPR and all of that. All of these policies are meant to address issues of growth of money supply. So when you talk about liquidity in the economy, it's not just about cash. It's about demand deposits, it's about fixed deposits. And cash as a percentage of liquidity in the economy is just about 15% or even less. So cash is not such a big issue when it comes to issues of monetary policy. I agree with you because of some of the sharp practices and all manner of malpractices happening in the POS space. There is need for proper regulation so that people don't use their platform to perpetrate crime or fraud or do all sorts of things, just as it's happened in other spheres of our society. So that oversight is very, very necessary. But that does not distract from the fact that those guys are rendering a very, very important service to the citizens. And also you have to note that because of the environment in which we are, they are now even competing with the banks for cash. Sometimes they go to all these retail outlets to buy cash, to make cash available to the citizens. So we are now in a new situation, or a new normal, if I may call it, where the practice before now of people carrying their cash to go and deposit in the bank is now changing. Because the POS people are now competing with them for cash. And the incentive to go and deposit in the bank is reducing. Until now, there was even a penalty for you if you carry cash to the bank to deposit. I think that has now been taken away. But the POS guys, they even offer some incentives at the petrol stations, at some retail outlets, to be able to get the cash. But the more important thing, as I speak to you, is that we need to estimate what the current demand of cash is and ensure that we provide adequate amount of cash to service the economy. That will not take anything away from all the policy measures around liquidity management. Just as I said, cash as a function of money supply is less than 15%. So it doesn't pose any risk to monetary policy.
Okay, if I can just touch on there, and I understand what you mean by the service that is being offered by some of these, POS vendors. But what would you say to the growing allegations that some banks are actually complicit in diverting the cash that is meant for ATMs to POS agents for profit? How widespread do you believe this practice has become, and what measures, as we start to wrap up, can be taken to investigate and address these claims effectively so that it can be nipped in the bud if it were true?
Well, we cannot rule out that possibility. I don't have specific data on that. But to the extent that there is greater incentive for cash to flow to the POS operators than for the cash to come into the banks, we cannot rule out that possibility. For those guys who are at the teller points to be selling the cash to POS, we can't rule it out. So it's a regulatory issue. It's a regulatory issue. So it is for the banks or the central bank to how to strengthen its oversight over how we have, these bank officials behave. So if there are consequences for these actions, I'm sure everybody will sit up. But we need to address the fundamentals. Because sometimes some of these things are symptoms or some failures, as far as policy environment is concerned. Prices have gone up by 50%, by 100%, imagine somebody who, for instance, bought a cattle last year, a very mature cattle, maybe for 500,000. This year, you need about $1 million to buy the same cattle. So imagine you are dealing with somebody who is not on the online platform, who is insisting that you have to pay cash. So your demand for cash has increased, and the supply has remained the same. So you have this kind of challenge, obviously. So we need to also relate to the fundamentals in terms of the increasing demand for cash as a result of increasing prices of goods and services. And to the extent that you need to pay for these goods and services, sometimes in cash, your demand for cash will increase. So that's a very fundamental issue that we need to address.
A lot of issues that need to be addressed. The government has their work cut out for them, especially the banks. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Dr. Muda Yusuf.